On a spring morning in the year 2000 in the small timber town of Sweet Home, Oregon, a woman walked into the Linn County Sheriff's office with trembling hands and a story that would haunt investigators for 2 decades. Her name was Jennifer Huston, 28 years old, a mother of 2, a substitute teacher known for her bright smile and her devotion to her children. She had been missing for 3 days. Her husband, Callan Huston, 32, a contract logger with steady work and a reputation for keeping to himself, reported finding her wandering along Highway 20 near the Santiam River, disoriented and unable to explain where she had been. The deputies took her statement. They photographed the scratches on her arms. They noted the mud on her jeans and the vacancy in her eyes. But within 72 hours, Jennifer Huston would be dead, and the question that would hang over Sweet Home like morning fog for the next 20 years was simple and terrible. Who really knew what happened in those missing days, and why did it take so long for anyone to listen? Sweet Home sits in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains, population just over 9,000, a place where logging trucks rumble through town before dawn, and the scent of Douglas fir mixes with wood smoke from backyard burn piles. The Santiam River runs cold and fast through the valley, fed by snowmelt from the high country, carving through basalt and ancient volcanic rock. In the year 2000, Sweet Home was a town trying to hold on. The timber industry that had sustained it for generations was changing, shrinking, and families that had worked the same mills for 3 generations were watching their children move away to Eugene or Portland or anywhere with more promise. The main street had empty storefronts. The high school football team still drew crowds on Friday nights. People knew their neighbors. They left their doors unlocked. They believed they understood the rhythms of their own lives. Jennifer Huston had grown up in Sweet Home. Her maiden name was Morrison, and her father had worked at the Foster Dam for 30 years before retiring with a bad back and a modest pension. She had been homecoming princess her junior year. She married Callan Huston in 1995, a small ceremony at the First Baptist Church with reception in the fellowship hall. They had 2 children, Emma, 4 years old with her mother's dark hair and quick laugh, and Jacob, 18 months, still wobbly on his feet and learning to form words. Jennifer worked as a substitute teacher at the elementary school, filling in when regular teachers were sick or on leave. She taught art classes on Thursday afternoons at the community center. She sang in the church choir. Those who knew her said she had a way of making people feel seen, feel heard, feel like they mattered. Callan Huston was different, quieter. He had moved to Sweet Home from eastern Oregon in his early 20s, hired on with a logging crew working Forest Service contracts in the Willamette National Forest. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with hands scarred from chainsaw work and years of handling cables and chokers. He kept his truck clean. He paid his bills on time. He didn't drink much, didn't cause trouble. At social gatherings, he stood near the edge of conversations, listening more than talking. Some people found him reserved. Others found him cold. Jennifer's mother would later say, quietly, that she had never quite warmed to him, though she couldn't say exactly why. Tuesday, April 11, 2000 began like most spring mornings in Sweet Home. The air was cool, the sky overcast with clouds that promised rain but hadn't yet delivered. Jennifer woke at 6:15. She made coffee in the old percolator her grandmother had given her. She woke Emma and dressed Jacob, who squirmed and protested and wanted to stay in his crib. Callan left for work at 6:45, his lunch packed in the blue cooler he carried every day, his logging boots laced tight. He kissed Jennifer on the cheek. He told her he'd be home by 5:30. The door closed. The truck started. The sound of the engine faded down Cascade Drive toward Highway 20. Jennifer had no substitute teaching work scheduled that day. She planned to take the children to the library for story time at 10 o'clock, then stop at the grocery store on the way home. She had written a list on the back of an envelope: milk, bread, chicken, carrots, apples. The list would later be found on the kitchen counter, the pen lying beside it, the words written in her neat, curving script. At 9:15, Jennifer's neighbor, Patricia Clemens, saw her loading the children into her car, a 1997 Honda Accord, forest green with a small dent in the rear bumper. Patricia waved. Jennifer waved back. Emma was buckled into her booster seat. Jacob was in his car seat crying about something, his face red and scrunched. Patricia would later say that Jennifer looked tired but not upset, not anxious, not different from any other morning. The library story time started at 10 o'clock. Jennifer never arrived. At 11:30, the librarian, Margaret Chen, called Jennifer's home phone. No answer. Margaret thought nothing of it. Children got sick. Plans changed. It was a Tuesday in April in Sweet Home, Oregon, and there was no reason yet to worry. At 12:15, Jennifer's mother, Carol Morrison, called her daughter's house. No answer. She called the cell phone Jennifer carried in her purse. No answer. Carol felt a small flutter of concern but pushed it away. Jennifer was an adult. She had errands to run, children to manage, a life that didn't require constant check-ins. At 3:45, Carol called again. Still no answer. At 4:30, she drove to Jennifer's house on Cascade Drive. The Honda Accord was not in the driveway. The front door was locked. Carol peered through the living room window. The television was off. The toys were scattered across the floor as they always were. Nothing looked disturbed. She called Callan's work number, left a message. At 5:30, Callan arrived home to find Carol waiting on the front porch. He stepped out of his truck, still wearing his work clothes, sawdust on his jeans. He looked at her. She asked where Jennifer was. He said he didn't know. He had been at work all day. He tried the front door, found it locked, used his key. They went inside together. The house was quiet. The breakfast dishes sat in the sink. Emma's backpack hung on its hook by the door. Jacob's bottle was on the kitchen counter, half full of milk that had gone warm. Callan called the sheriff's office at 6:05. The deputy who took the call was James Brennan, a 10-year veteran who had grown up in Lebanon, the next town over, and knew Sweet Home well enough to understand that people didn't just vanish here. He drove to the house on Cascade Drive. He took Callan's statement in the living room while Carol Morrison sat on the couch, twisting a tissue in her hands. Callan spoke slowly, methodically. He had left for work at 6:45. He had been cutting timber on a Forest Service parcel near Iron Mountain, about 30 miles east. His crew foreman could verify his presence. He had not spoken to Jennifer during the day. She had not called. There had been no argument that morning. Everything had been normal. Deputy Brennan asked about the car. Callan described it: 1997 Honda Accord, forest green, license plate Oregon 428 DPL. Brennan radioed it in. He asked about Jennifer's state of mind. Callan paused. He said she had been tired lately. The baby wasn't sleeping well. She sometimes felt overwhelmed, but she loved the children. She would never leave them. Brennan wrote this down. He asked if there were any problems in the marriage. Callan looked at him without expression. He said no. The search began that night. Deputies drove the roads between Sweet Home and Lebanon, between Sweet Home and Brownsville, between Sweet Home and the mountain passes to the east. They checked the parking lots at the Safeway, the library, the community center. They checked the riverbanks where the Santiam ran swift and dark. They found nothing. Wednesday, April 12, 2000, dawned gray and damp. Rain began to fall at dawn, steady and cold. The search expanded. Volunteers gathered at the fire station. The fire chief, Robert Dawson, organized teams with maps and radios. They walked the logging roads. They checked the campgrounds and trailheads. They walked the ditches along Highway 20. Jennifer's photograph appeared on the local news that evening. her dark hair pulled back, her smile warm, her eyes looking directly at the camera. The anchor asked anyone with information to call the sheriff's office. The phone rang, tips came in, none led anywhere. Thursday morning, April 13, 2000 at 7:23, a motorist driving east on Highway 20 near the Santiam River Bridge saw a woman walking along the shoulder of the road. She was wearing jeans and a gray sweatshirt. She was barefoot. Her hair was tangled. She was walking slowly, unsteadily, as if drunk or injured. The motorist pulled over. He asked if she needed help. She stared at him. She said her name was Jennifer. She said she needed to go home. The motorist called 911. Deputies arrived within minutes. They found Jennifer sitting on the guardrail, her feet muddy and scratched, her arms covered in small cuts as if she had pushed through brush. She was shivering. She could not explain where she had been. She said she didn't remember. She said she had been walking. She said she was cold. An ambulance took her to the hospital in Lebanon. Doctors examined her. They found dehydration, minor abrasions, no sign of sexual assault, no broken bones, no obvious trauma. Her blood work was normal. She was released that afternoon. Callan picked her up from the hospital. He brought her home. The children clung to her. Emma asked where Mommy had been. Jennifer said she didn't know. She said she was sorry. She said everything would be okay now. But those who knew her said she wasn't the same after that. She was quieter. She startled easily. She stopped singing in the choir. She stopped teaching art classes. At night, she would wake up crying, and when Callan asked what was wrong, she would shake her head and say nothing, nothing at all. Deputy Brennan filed his report. He noted the scratches, the mud, the confusion. He noted that Jennifer could not account for 3 days. He interviewed her twice. She gave the same answers. She didn't remember. She had been walking. She didn't know where. The investigation remained open, but without leads, without evidence, without any clear direction. 11 days later, on April 24, 2000, Jennifer Huston was found dead in her garage. Part 2. The investigation. The call came in at 2:15 in the afternoon. Callan Huston, his voice flat and mechanical, reported that he had come home for lunch and found his wife unresponsive in the garage. Deputy Brennan arrived within 8 minutes. Fire and rescue followed. When Brennan entered the garage through the side door, he saw Jennifer slumped against the rear wall near the workbench where Callan stored his tools. Her face was pale. Her lips were blue. There was a prescription bottle on the floor beside her, empty. Brennan checked for a pulse, found none. The paramedics confirmed what he already knew. The Lynn County medical examiner arrived at 3:45. Dr. Sarah Vance was a 20-year veteran who had seen farm accidents and logging deaths and overdoses in trailer parks, and she approached every scene with the same careful, methodical attention. She photographed Jennifer's body from multiple angles. She noted the position, the lividity, the ambient temperature. She noted the prescription bottle, Ambien, prescribed to Jennifer Huston on April 14, 10 days earlier, 30 tablets, now empty. She noted a glass of water on the workbench, half full. She noted no visible signs of struggle, no defensive wounds, no bruising inconsistent with collapse. The preliminary conclusion was suicide by drug overdose. Callan gave his statement in the living room again, the same room where he had reported Jennifer missing 2 weeks earlier. He sat in the same chair. He spoke in the same measured tone. He said he had come home at 12:30 for lunch, which he sometimes did when working nearby sites. He had called out to Jennifer. No answer. He had checked the house. Empty. He had checked the garage. That's when he found her. He had called 911 immediately. Brennan asked if Jennifer had seemed depressed. Callan said yes. Since she came back, since those 3 days, she hadn't been herself. She had been withdrawn. She had trouble sleeping. The doctor had prescribed the Ambien. Brennan asked if she had talked about harming herself. Callan said no, not directly, but she had seemed hopeless. The autopsy was performed on April 25, 2000, at the State Medical Examiner's office in Clackamas. Dr. Vance opened Jennifer Huston's body with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times. She examined the organs. She took tissue samples. She measured and weighed and documented. The toxicology report would take weeks, but the preliminary findings were consistent with zolpidem overdose. The stomach contained partially dissolved tablets. The lungs showed some fluid but no signs of aspiration. The heart was normal. There was no evidence of physical trauma beyond the scratches Jennifer had sustained during her 3 missing days. Dr. Vance wrote in her report, "Manner of death, pending toxicology, preliminary findings consistent with intentional overdose." The funeral was held on April 29, 2000 at the First Baptist Church. The sanctuary was full. Jennifer's mother sat in the front pew, her face hollow with grief. Jennifer's father sat beside her, his hand gripping hers. Emma and Jacob stayed with Jennifer's sister in Eugene. Callan sat alone on the other side of the aisle, wearing a dark suit, his face expressionless. The pastor spoke about loss and faith and the mysteries of human suffering. He did not use the word suicide. He did not speculate about why. After the service, people gathered in the fellowship hall. They ate casseroles and spoke in low voices. Some whispered, some wondered. Carol Morrison stood near the kitchen, accepting condolences, her eyes red and swollen. A woman from the church choir approached her. The woman's name was Ruth Sanderson, and she had known Jennifer since childhood. Ruth said quietly, carefully, that she had seen Jennifer the day before she died. Jennifer had seemed anxious but not suicidal. Jennifer had been making plans. She had mentioned taking the children to the coast that summer. Ruth said it didn't make sense. Carol Morrison looked at her and said nothing, but something shifted behind her eyes. Deputy Brennan attended the funeral. He stood in the back. He watched Callan Huston. He noticed that Callan didn't cry. He noticed that Callan accepted condolences with a slight nod but didn't engage in conversation. He noticed that Callan left immediately after the service, before the reception, before the fellowship hall. Brennan went back to the office. He pulled the case file. He reread his notes from Jennifer's disappearance. He reread his notes from the death scene. He looked at the timeline. April 11, Jennifer disappears. April 13, Jennifer found walking along Highway 20. April 14, Jennifer prescribed Ambien. April 24, Jennifer dead. 11 days from prescription to overdose. He thought about the scratches on her arms. He thought about her inability to remember. He thought about Callan's composure. He called Dr. Vance. He asked about the scratches Jennifer had sustained during her missing days. Dr. Vance said they were consistent with moving through brush or wooded terrain. Brennan asked if they could be consistent with restraint. Dr. Vance paused. She said it was possible but unlikely. The pattern didn't suggest ligature marks. Brennan thanked her and hung up. The toxicology report came back on May 15, 2000. Zolpidem concentration in the blood, 4.2 mg/L, more than 20 times the therapeutic level. No other drugs detected. No alcohol. The manner of death was ruled suicide. But those who knew Jennifer, those who had watched her with her children, those who had heard her laugh and seen her paint watercolors with Emma on Sunday afternoons, whispered quietly that it didn't feel right. Something was missing. Something didn't fit. Carol Morrison filed a complaint with the sheriff's office, asking for a more thorough investigation. She was told that the case was closed. The medical examiner had ruled. There was no evidence of foul play. The Huston house on Cascade Drive went quiet. Callan continued working. He hired a woman from church to watch Emma and Jacob during the day. He kept the blinds drawn. He stopped answering the door when neighbors knocked. The lawn grew long. Mail piled up on the porch. Weeks passed. Months passed. In September 2000, Carol Morrison filed for grandparents' rights, seeking custody of Emma and Jacob. She hired a lawyer from Eugene, a woman named Patricia Wells who specialized in family law. The petition cited Callan's emotional unavailability and the children's need for stability. Callan fought it. He hired his own lawyer. The hearings were brief and procedural. In November 2000, the judge ruled in Callan's favor. He was the biological father. There was no evidence of neglect or abuse. The children would remain with him. Carol Morrison wept in the courthouse hallway. She told Patricia Wells that something was wrong, that Callan had done something, that she knew it the way a mother knows. Patricia Wells told her gently that knowing and proving were different things. The case went cold. The file went into storage. Sweet Home moved on. People stopped talking about Jennifer Huston. The swing in the backyard hung still. The toy truck lay on its side in the grass, forgotten. Part 3. The Silence. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the creeping certainty that what you've been told is not the truth, who have lain awake at night replaying conversations and searching for the crack where the lie began, you understand the weight Carol Morrison carried through the years that followed. She saw Emma and Jacob on supervised visits, once a month, 2 hours in a room at the community center with a social worker present. She watched them grow. She watched Emma become quiet and watchful. She watched Jacob, who had been a baby when his mother died, grow into a solemn child who didn't remember Jennifer's face except in photographs. In 2002, Callan Huston sold the house on Cascade Drive. He moved 30 miles west to Lebanon, to a rental house on the edge of town where no one knew his history and no one asked questions. He changed Emma's school. He stopped attending church. Carol Morrison's visitation continued but became harder to arrange. Callan would cancel appointments, citing work or the children's illness or scheduling conflicts. The social worker documented this but took no action. In 2004, Callan remarried. Her name was Sharon Beach, a woman he had met at a diner in Lebanon where she worked as a waitress. She was younger than Jennifer had been, 26 to his 38, with bleached blonde hair and a nervous laugh. They married at the courthouse. There was no reception. Sharon moved into the rental house. She tried to mother Emma and Jacob. Those who saw them together said the children were polite to her but distant, as if they understood she was temporary. Emma, by then 8 years old, had started drawing. She filled notebooks with pencil sketches, houses with dark windows, trees with no leaves, figures standing alone. Her third-grade teacher, Ms. Linda Cortez, noticed. She asked Emma about the drawings. Emma shrugged and said she didn't know why she drew them. Ms. Cortez mentioned it to the school counselor. The counselor met with Emma twice. Emma was polite and quiet. She answered questions with yes or no. She revealed nothing. At night, Emma had nightmares. She would wake up screaming. Sharon would rush to her room, turn on the light, find Emma sitting up in bed, her eyes wide and terrified. Sharon would ask what was wrong. Emma would say she couldn't remember the dream. She would say she was sorry for waking everyone up. Sharon would sit with her until she fell back asleep, and in those quiet moments, Sharon began to notice things. She noticed that Callan never comforted the children when they cried. She noticed that he kept Jennifer's photographs in a box in the garage, hidden away, never displayed. She noticed that when Carol Morrison called, Callan's jaw would tighten and he would speak in monosyllables. She noticed that he controlled the money, the schedules, the decisions. She noticed that when she asked about Jennifer, about how she died, about those 3 missing days, Callan would go silent and leave the room. In 2006, Emma was 10 years old. She was in 5th grade. She had a teacher named Mr. Brian Holloway who taught language arts and had a reputation for connecting with difficult students. He assigned a personal narrative essay. Emma wrote about a memory she wasn't sure was real. She wrote about being very young, maybe 4 years old, and hiding in a closet with her brother. She wrote about hearing her mother crying. She wrote about her father's voice, angry and low. She wrote about the sound of a door slamming. She wrote that she didn't know if this really happened or if she had dreamed it. Mr. Holloway read the essay. He felt a cold weight in his stomach. He contacted the school counselor. The counselor contacted Child Protective Services. A caseworker named Diane Frost visited the home in Lebanon. She interviewed Emma separately from Callan. Emma was polite and quiet. She said everything was fine. She said her essay was just a story, just imagination. Diane Frost interviewed Jacob, who was 7. He said everything was fine. She interviewed Sharon. Sharon hesitated. She said the children seemed anxious sometimes, but that Callan was a good father. Diane Frost filed her report. No evidence of current abuse or neglect. Case closed. But Sharon couldn't let it go. She started watching Callan more closely. She started paying attention to the things he didn't say. She started noticing the way he reacted when anything about Jennifer came up, the way his whole body would go rigid, the way his eyes would go flat and cold. She started wondering what he had done. In 2008, Sharon asked Callan directly. They were in the kitchen. The children were at school. She asked him what really happened to Jennifer. She asked him about the 3 missing days. She asked him if he had hurt her. Callan looked at Sharon for a long moment. Then he told her to drop it. He told her it was none of her business. He told her that if she ever asked again, she would regret it. Sharon felt fear then, real fear, the kind that makes your hands shake and your throat close. She filed for divorce 3 weeks later. The divorce was finalized in 2009. Sharon moved to Portland. She never spoke to Callan again. Emma was 13. Jacob was 10. They stayed with their father. Carol Morrison tried again to seek custody. The judge denied her petition. The children were older now. There was no evidence of harm. Callan had remarried and divorced, but that wasn't grounds for removing children from a parent's care. Emma withdrew further into herself. She stopped drawing. She stopped talking about her mother. She existed in a careful, controlled silence, and those who saw her in those years, teachers and neighbors and the few friends she managed to keep, said she seemed like she was waiting for something, though no one could say what. In 2014, Emma turned 18. She graduated from high school. She moved to Eugene for college. She left her father's house and didn't look back. Jacob was 15, still living with Callan, and Emma called him every week. She told him to hold on. She told him it would be okay. She told him things she couldn't quite name yet but felt in her bones. For those who have ever carried a secret you didn't know how to tell, who have felt the weight of something you half remember and half buried, who have wondered if speaking would change everything or nothing at all, you understand what Emma Huston carried through her teenage years and into adulthood. The memory was there, just beneath the surface, waiting. Part 4, The Revelation. The breaking point came in 2019, 19 years after Jennifer Huston died. Emma was 23 years old, working as a social worker in Eugene, helping children navigate the foster care system. Jacob was 20, a community college student living in Salem, studying computer science and keeping his distance from his father. They saw Callan on holidays, brief and obligatory visits that left them both drained and silent for days afterward. In March 2019, Emma started seeing a therapist. Her name was Dr. Rebecca Ortiz, a trauma specialist who worked with adults recovering from childhood abuse and neglect. Emma didn't use those words at first. She talked about anxiety. She talked about nightmares that had returned. She talked about a feeling she couldn't shake, a sense that something terrible had happened that she had witnessed but couldn't remember. Dr. Ortiz asked her to describe the nightmares. Emma said they were always the same. She was 4 years old. She was in the garage. Her mother was there, slumped against the wall. Her father was standing over her. There was a bottle in his hand. Emma was hiding behind the workbench, watching, frozen. She would wake up before seeing anything else. Dr. Ortiz asked if Emma thought this was a memory or a fear. Emma said she didn't know, but it felt real. It felt like something that happened. Over the next 6 months, through careful, patient work, Emma began to piece together fragments. She remembered her mother coming home after being missing. She remembered her mother crying at night. She remembered hearing her parents argue in low, tense voices. She remembered her father's anger, controlled and cold. She remembered being told to stay in her room, to be quiet, to not ask questions. In September 2019, Emma called Jacob. She told him about the therapy sessions. She told him about the nightmares. She asked if he remembered anything. Jacob was quiet for a long time. Then he said he had dreams too. He said he saw their mother in the garage. He said he saw their father doing something, but he couldn't see what. He said he had always thought it was just his imagination because he had been so young. Emma said, "What if it wasn't imagination?" They decided together to go to the police. On October 3, 2019, Emma and Jacob walked into the Lynn County Sheriff's Office. They asked to speak to someone about their mother's death. They were directed to Detective Maria Santos, a 15-year veteran of the Major Crimes Unit who had not been involved in the original investigation in 2000. Detective Santos listened to their story. She took notes. She asked questions. She told them she would look into it. Detective Santos pulled the case file. She read Deputy Brennan's reports, now yellowed and faded. She read the medical examiner's findings. She read the toxicology results. She noted the 3 missing days. She noted Jennifer's inability to remember. She noted Callan's composure, his lack of emotion, his immediate assumption of suicide. She called Dr. Sarah Vance, now retired. Dr. Vance remembered the case. She said it had always bothered her. She said Jennifer's positioning in the garage had seemed odd, too neat, too arranged. She said the prescription had been recent, only 10 days old. She said that people who overdose on sleeping pills typically do it in bed, not sitting upright in a garage. But there had been no evidence of foul play. The toxicology had been clear. Detective Santos contacted the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. She described the case. She asked if they saw any red flags. The analyst she spoke to, a man named Dr. Richard Chen, said the 3 missing days were highly suspicious. He said that unexplained disappearances followed by sudden deaths within weeks were not typical suicide patterns. He said it was worth reinvestigating. In November 2019, Detective Santos interviewed Carol Morrison, now 72 years old and living in a small house in Sweet Home with her husband. Carol wept when Santos told her the case was being reopened. She said she had waited 19 years to hear those words. She said she had always known Callan had done something. She said Jennifer would never have left her children, not willingly, not ever. Santos interviewed Sharon Beach, now living in Portland under her remarried name, Sharon Lindsay. Sharon told her about the conversation in the kitchen in 2008, about Callan's threat, about the fear she had felt. She said she had wanted to say something at the time but had been too afraid. She said she would testify now. Santos interviewed neighbors from Cascade Drive in Sweet Home, those who still lived there and remembered the Hustons. One woman, Patricia Clemens, the neighbor who had waved to Jennifer on the morning she disappeared, said she had seen Callan's truck parked in the driveway at odd hours in the days after Jennifer came back. She said she had thought it was strange because Callan had told everyone he was working full days. She said she had mentioned it to Deputy Brennan at the time, but nothing had come of it. Santos pulled Callan's work records from April 2000. She contacted the logging company he had worked for, now defunct but with records stored in a warehouse in Salem. She found his timesheets. On April 12 and April 13, the days Jennifer was missing, Callan had clocked out early both days, leaving work by 1 o'clock instead of his usual 5:30. He had told deputies he worked full days. He had lied. On December 10, 2019, Detective Santos obtained a warrant to search Callan Huston's current residence, a small house in Corvallis where he lived alone. Emma was 23. Jacob was 20. Neither had seen their father in over a year. The search team arrived at 6 in the morning. Callan answered the door in his undershirt and jeans, his face unshaven. Santos showed him the warrant. He stepped aside without speaking. The team entered. They photographed every room. They opened every drawer. They searched the garage, the attic, the crawl space. In a locked file cabinet in the garage, they found a box. Inside the box were Jennifer's belongings from the hospital, her clothes from April 13, 2000, the gray sweatshirt and jeans she had been wearing when found walking along Highway 20. There was also a notebook, small and spiral-bound, hidden beneath the clothes. The notebook contained entries in Jennifer's handwriting, dated April 14 through April 23, 2000. The entries were disjointed, confused, written in a shaky script. April 14. I don't remember where I was. Callan says I was sick. I don't feel sick. I feel afraid. April 17. He watches me all the time. He says I tried to hurt myself. I don't remember that. April 21. I want to leave, but I'm afraid of what he'll do. He says I'm not well. He says I need help. April 23. I'm going to tell someone. I'm going to call my mother tomorrow. April 24 was the day Jennifer died. The notebook was sent to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab for analysis. Handwriting experts confirmed it was Jennifer's writing. Forensic psychologists reviewed the entries and noted patterns consistent with psychological abuse and possible coerced drugging. On January 15, 2020, Callan Huston was arrested at his home in Corvallis and charged with second-degree murder. The prosecution's theory: Callan had abducted Jennifer on April 11, 2000, held her somewhere for 3 days, released her in a state of confusion and fear, then systematically isolated and manipulated her until he could stage her death as suicide. The 3 missing days were key. Where had she been? Who had kept her? The prosecution believed Callan had. The arrest shocked the community. Sweet Home, a town that had moved on from Jennifer's death 2 decades ago, suddenly found itself thrust back into the story. The local newspaper ran the headline, "Oregon 2000 Cold Case Solved, Arrest Shocks the Community." Television crews arrived. Reporters interviewed Carol Morrison, now vindicated after 19 years. They interviewed Emma and Jacob, who declined to appear on camera but released a statement through their lawyer. "We believe our mother was taken from us, and we believe our father is responsible. We hope the truth will finally be heard." Callan's defense attorney, a public defender named Thomas Reeves, argued that the notebook could have been fabricated, that there was no physical evidence tying Callan to Jennifer's death, that the medical examiner had ruled it suicide, that the case was built on speculation and adult children seeking closure. He pointed out that no one knew where Jennifer had been during the 3 missing days. He pointed out that her amnesia could have been genuine, could have been from trauma unrelated to Callan. The trial began in September 2020, delayed by the pandemic but finally proceeding with masks and social distancing in the courtroom. Emma testified. She described the nightmares, the fragments of memory, the sense that she had seen something terrible. Jacob testified. He described the same. Carol Morrison testified. She described Jennifer's character, her love for her children, her strength. Dr. Ortiz testified about trauma and recovered memory. Sharon Lindsay testified about Callan's threat in the kitchen. The prosecution presented the notebook. They presented the work records showing Callan had lied about his whereabouts. They presented expert testimony suggesting that Jennifer's overdose could have been coerced or administered while she was unconscious. They presented a timeline that showed Callan had opportunity, motive, and a pattern of control. The defense presented the medical examiner's original findings. They presented witnesses who said Callan had been a devoted father. They argued that the notebook proved nothing except that Jennifer had been depressed and confused in her final days. The jury deliberated for 4 days. On October 8, 2020, they returned a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Callan Huston stood as the verdict was read. His face showed no emotion. The judge set sentencing for 6 weeks later. On November 20, 2020, Callan Huston was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Emma and Jacob sat in the courtroom gallery holding hands. Carol Morrison sat beside them, tears streaming down her face. When the judge struck his gavel, Carol whispered, "Jennifer, we did it. We found the truth." Callan was led away in handcuffs. He did not look back. Closing. Clears throat. The case of Jennifer Huston is more than a story about a crime solved after 2 decades. It is a story about what happens when the people who love you refuse to stop believing, refuse to accept easy answers, refuse to let your voice be silenced even after death. Jennifer Huston died in a garage in Sweet Home, Oregon, in April 2000, but her story didn't end there. It lived on in her mother's determination, in her children's fragmented memories, in a notebook hidden away for 19 years. The question of where Jennifer was during those 3 missing days has never been fully answered. Callan Huston has not confessed. He maintains his innocence from prison. But the evidence suggests he took her somewhere, held her somewhere, did something to her that left her confused and terrified and unable to remember. The prosecution theorized he drugged her. They theorized he isolated her. They theorized he broke her down psychologically until she was too afraid to speak, too confused to act, too lost to save herself. Emma and Jacob Huston are adults now, building lives free from their father's shadow. Carol Morrison visits Jennifer's grave every week, brings flowers, speaks to her daughter as if she can hear. Sweet Home, Oregon, remains a small timber town in the shadow of the Cascades, a place where people still leave their doors unlocked and believe they understand the rhythms of their own lives. But the case changed something there, reminded people that evil doesn't always announce itself, that harm can happen quietly, that justice sometimes takes decades but is worth waiting for. Jennifer Huston's voice was silenced in a garage on a spring day in 2000, but it was heard again in a courtroom 20 years later, through the words she wrote in a notebook, through the testimony of her children, through the refusal of those who loved her to let her death be forgotten. If this story mattered to you, share it, talk about it. Remember that behind every cold case is a person who deserved better, a family who never stopped fighting, a truth that refused to stay buried. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard. Someone somewhere may still need you to believe them, to listen, to keep asking questions when everyone else has moved on. Justice is not always swift, but it can still arrive. Truth is not always loud, but it can still be spoken. Music fades. Subscribe, hit the bell, share the episode, and remember Jennifer.